Welcome back into the studio. Now these leopard eyes were the first pastel drawing I did 4 or 5 years ago. And now I've done many more pastel drawings and I've got a lot more experience. I thought it'd be interesting to look over this again and discuss things that I may have done differently now. So as I talk about things I would do differently now, I'm just going to show on the video the drawing as I did it, as I said, 4 or 5 years ago. So the paper type, I'm still using pastel matte for all of my pastel drawings. There really is no other paper that behaves like Clairefontaine pastel matte. I use various colours, but that surface that holds the pastel does it like no other, so that hasn't changed at all. But one major difference from what I'm doing now to what I did all those years ago is using these Conti pastel sticks. Now I use them quite exclusively on this drawing, this first drawing I did, to do the underlayer. Okay, so I didn't have many supplies at this stage. I had Conti sticks and I had a set of pastel pencils, and that was really it. So I was still learning a lot about pastels and how they behaved. I don't use these sticks pretty much at all now. I found them to be quite dry and gritty feeling and not smooth at all. Now that's not a problem if you use them for detailing. Because they're so hard, you can sharpen them up with some sandpaper and make them behave like a pencil, and some of the colours in there are really quite vibrant in the set, so that's handy. But I don't ever use them for underlayers. Okay, because of that grittiness, I found they can fill the tooth of the paper quite easily. They've got a fine sandiness when you're rubbing them in, as you'll see me do a bit later on. And that means they're kind of okay for doing things like this, putting in spots, but you really wouldn't want to use them for backgrounds. Okay, they're really difficult to use just because of the very makeup of them for backgrounds. So what do I do differently now? How would I approach this with all these markings and spots on the leopard? Well, over the years I found that I wanted something that wouldn't smudge when I'm putting in the black markings. So I ended up trying out various things, and black gouache paint, that worked just perfectly because it dries to a very similar feel to pastel matte itself, and pastels go over the top of it really well. Of course, the added benefit of it being paint is that it dries, so I can then put my underlayer over the top of it and the spots are not smudging or making anything messy, which they can do when you're just putting them in with pastel. Okay, so that's one major difference. I don't really use the Conti sticks anymore. If you've got and you've purchased Conti sticks, like I said, keep them for sharpening up and using them for like fine hair details and that type of thing. Don't use them for underlayers or backgrounds. Okay, so instead, for doing what I'm doing now, an underlayer, rather than those sticks, I'd be using most probably pan pastels. I find they're really efficient and effective, especially for underlayers. That's what you see me use frequently in my more recent videos. You could also use just pencils. You don't have to complicate things. There's not really a great deal that these Conti sticks can do that you can't just do with pastel pencils, as I later really found out. If I'm using pencils or the pans, I'll still blend in with my fingers, pushing into that pastel surface. Okay, so there's no reason you couldn't have done a drawing, or I couldn't have done this whole drawing just doing pastel pencils. But as I said, pan pastels, they're something I really love in my set, and I've got lots and lots of videos showing them being used as well. Now, something you will see me do in my latest drawings is this texturizing layer. I didn't know what to call it back then, but that's what I call it now, a texturizing layer. So basically I've got the general mid-tone color in place as the underlayer. Then where darks are required, I go in with my pencil. You could use those Conti sticks actually sharpened for this stage, and I just put in the darkest areas in between where the highlights are going to go eventually. Now this allows me to keep lighter areas that's going on top, as I said, those highlights, they can stay a bit brighter then when I put them on top. If I put this black over everything, I'd struggle to get my highlights to show up and to be nice and clean. Now it would have helped if I'd had that gouache in place on the spots. I wouldn't have needed to have put so much of this dark pencil down on those spot areas as well. It would have kept everything a little bit cleaner, so the details on top would have looked sharper, okay, and not as kind of a little bit muddy they look in the end of this. So that's something else that I changed slightly. I still use these paper stumps for softening. I use the Derwent rice paper stumps. They are softer when I'm doing the underlayers, and then if I want to blend a small area because my finger won't fit in there, then I can use harder stumps if I don't want it to blend out so much. So they are still a mainstay in my supplies and my technique, so that hasn't changed at all. Now something else that I haven't changed much, I use fairly blunt pencils when I'm drawing. Okay, I see lots and lots of comments, beginners, novices, asking how to get a really sharp point on your pencils, and we can never sharpen coloured pastel pencils to the degree of coloured pencils anyway. Okay, so I knew that straight away, so I made sure that my drawings are large enough when I do them so that I can attain the amount of detail I want without having to even attempt to get my pencils super sharp, because if you do that with pastels, they're just going to break anyway. Okay, so that was something I fortunately learnt on my first drawing, otherwise I could have been really frustrated with that. But that's, you don't have to sharpen your pencils incredibly sharp. Okay, so that's another tip, and once again I've got lots of videos on YouTube for anybody who's struggling with sharpening, and I cover that in detail and depth. So years on, have I learned anything new about pastel matte paper? Well, I have found, as I know lots of you have, that the lighter colours, so the white, the light greys, they've got a smoother surface to them. Okay, now when you're doing subjects like this that are really textured, then that makes no difference at all. Okay, you can use any of the papers. The darker the paper in general, the rougher that surface is. Now it's not a massive difference from the lightest white to the darkest anthracite, but there is a definite difference, no doubt due to the processing of it. So I'll keep using my favorite papers like the dark grey and the brown for most of my subjects like this. As I said, very textured subjects. You know, I like that mid-tone paper almost all the time on my drawings so that I can judge the lights and the darks more easily. Okay, the tonal range, that's why I use these middle toned papers. But if I've got a subject that demands a lot of softness to it, so it could be perhaps a smaller pet portrait, okay, where the details are all shrunken down, you may have a really soft background in there as well that you want to keep, you know, without a graininess showing to it. I find now that I'm more inclined to use the Pastel Matte light blue. Okay, now they say light blue and it's not really that blue, it's more of a grey blue again, but it's you know, pretty much a mid-tone paper. Now the advantage of it over something like a mid-tone grey, so the dark grey or the brown, but the dark grey especially, is that it's a smoother surface. Okay, so it's very much worth getting some of that and trying it out, especially for things perhaps like human portraits or things, as I said, that wanted or needed a smooth background in there. It's easier to blend on that light blue paper. But if I'm doing a subject that needs lots and lots of texture and lots of layers, you know, you can get plenty of layers on the light blue, but that's when I'd switch to more of my browns and my mid-tone or dark grey papers. Now, something else I do now that has made a massive difference in the tonal range of my drawings is how I get my blacks so black. So, okay, this Carbothello black pencil that I'm using here, it looks really dark. It looks like it's putting down a really dark black, and it is really dark compared to lots of other mediums, but it's nowhere near as dark as, say, a soft black pastel stick. The trouble with soft sticks, as I knew even at this early stage, is that you can't really sharpen them and get a fine point to them to get really small details. Okay, you can use edges and things to get details, but not really small details. So a while ago I came across new pastel sticks. So they're a hard stick, not dissimilar to a Cretacolor, and you can sharpen the end of those, and I used those for quite a long time, and they served the purpose. They got the blacks really black, and when you got the darks really dark, then the lights all of a sudden look lighter, so you've got a bigger tonal range, and that gives your work more impact, especially from a distance. The problem with new pastels, they were so difficult to get in the UK. I did buy a good amount for myself that would last me, you know, a couple of years, but I know or knew lots of people couldn't actually get them. And then I came across Cretacolor black chalk sticks, or chalk leads. Now when I found these, that was a real big changing point. It meant I could get them super black, but I could also sharpen the tips just by using a cheap pencil sharpener, you know, one of those cheap plastic school type ones. You put these in a holder, they're 5.6mm leads, and you just put them in a holder that you can get in virtually all art stores and art supplies, but they make the blacks super black. Now the one thing you've got to keep in mind, the outside of pack must say black chalk lead. Now you've got to make sure it says chalk. If it says something like graphite or neo or anything else other than chalk on there, it's not the right thing. Okay, but as I said, that was a big game changer, and it allowed me to get my darks super dark very easily. Obviously new pastel will still work and is really good as well, and it's just as black, but this has the versatility of being able to sharpen the end really easily and to actually put them in a holder so you keep your hands nice and clean too. Now one final thing I've really learned over the years is to keep an area that needs to be extremely light. It doesn't really show, there's no real areas on this particular demonstration, but let's say for instance that you've got a swan that's got some really white areas on there. You don't want anything darker underneath because you just can't get that pure white back, even with pastels. Now with pastels we've got obviously a lot more leeway than some of the other pencil type mediums for putting light on top of dark, but it's still not you can't get a pure white on top of something darker underneath. Okay, you can get away with it a bit more if you use the softer pastel pencils or even better soft sticks, but what I've learned is if you need an area to be pure white, it's better to go around that area. And to a lesser extent it applies to pure blacks as well. If you've got an area, so say for instance the area of the pupil or around the eye on this drawing, I wouldn't want like a mid-tone grey underneath it, otherwise I'd struggle to get the purity of that dark as well. So reserve the areas more for your very darkest darks and your lightest lights. Now just to finish off this video, I know quite a lot may be beginners and wondering, okay, so what supplies should I buy now? Well, you only really need pastel pencils if you're working fairly small. Okay, you can do the underlayers with them, the details on top. You don't really need to complicate it any more than that. When you're going to larger drawings, then these pencils are going to wear down really quickly, so that's when things like pan pastels and soft pastels come into their own for the underlayers. And as far as soft pastel sticks, my favourite brands are Rembrandt and Jackson's own brand. That's the two that I like because they are much harder than some of the real super soft sticks. With the super soft sticks, they can fill up the tooth of the paper, especially in an underlayer, extremely quickly, and then you can't get the details on top. So if you're a complete beginner, all you really need is pencils. Start fairly small until you've got the hang of it, and then you can go larger. And for paper, I always use pastel matte paper. You can get them in books, so you can get various colours and try out the different colours for yourself as well. So the only two things you really need is pastel pencils. My favourites are Pitt or Carbothello, and a booklet of pastel matte paper, and then you're good to go. To add on top of that then, that Cretacolor black lead, the chalk lead that I mentioned earlier on, that's extremely useful, and you can also get it in white, and that's really useful as well. So if you wanted to get some of those, you'll find that you will definitely have an advantage with those, and it's something you're always going to use. Hopefully you found that video useful. I've got loads and loads of other free ones on my YouTube channel, and if you're looking for really long demonstrations, very in-depth, perhaps you're hoping to become a pet portrait artist and you want to learn the techniques for that, or wildlife artist, if you come over to my Patreon art channel, I've got way over 1,000 members. I think it's around about 1,500 or 1,600 members on there now, all learning from my videos. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all again real soon. Just wanted to quickly mention my Patreon channel for those looking for even more in-depth art instruction. It's packed full of pastel videos, oil videos as well, and those videos are being added to new ones every single month. I have videos for the complete beginner that have never done pastels or oils before with just limited supplies, and I take you from the very first blocking in all the way through to the final detailed drawings and paintings. I've also got some really unusual subjects as well, and in all of my videos I always take you through all the details. You see everything I do, how I create my work. But it's not just for beginners, it's also for novices, and I also show the best artwork that I've ever done as well. And this particular elephant video spans 6 hours, so you know you're going to see tons and tons of details, tips and techniques. And as mentioned, I've got lots of oil videos on there too, so there really is something for everybody, and you get access to hundreds of hours worth of videos for just $4. Now over 1,000 members strong. Hope to see you there soon.